If you were to hear that a child is attacked by a dog, what would you assume about this incident? Would you assume it was a pit bull, or that the child was ignoring the dog's signs? Would you assume that the dog had an abusive past or not? There are many factors that go into a dog's likelihood to be aggressive towards people or other animals. It's not just their breed. Breed-specific legislation unfairly stereotypes dogs based on their breed and should be banned. A lot of people in this class are either in an animal-related major here at Findlay, or they have pets, or they're just general animal lovers. In a survey taken by this class, 80% felt that breed-specific legislation should not be implemented. While some of our classmates have known pit bulls that have had aggressive behaviors, others had experiences with other breeds like Great Danes that showed aggressive tendencies. This shows people have been exposed to aggression from breeds other than just pit bulls. It's not specifically their breed. I'm a proud owner of a Staffordshire American Terrier / German Shepherd mix. His name's Max, and he does not have a mean, aggressive bone in his body. My dog isn't the sole reason for why there should not be breed-specific legislation. That would be very biased and not reliable at all. So I've done extensive research to support the banning of breed-specific legislation. Today I'm going to discuss the problem of pit bulls and other dog breeds typically thought to be aggressive, being the main breed in animal shelters, the ineffectiveness of enforcement of breed-specific legislation, and how respected organizations in the animal world do not support this. The unfair stereotyping of dogs based on their breed is demonstrated in breed-specific legislation, as well as the abundance of pit bulls and other dogs typically labeled as aggressive that are found in animal shelters all across the country. If you've ever been in an animal shelter, then you've seen how many pit bulls and other similar breeds make up a large portion of their population. According to SaveAbull.org, pit bulls and pit bull mixes make up a third of the shelter populations nationally, but in highly populated areas, it can be up to 65%. People have been influenced to think that just because a dog is labeled as a pit bull, that this automatically makes them a danger to themselves and their loved ones. While every rescue does have their own story, which may cause some select cases to have behavior problems, many of the pit bulls are sweet and loving animals that just need to be given a chance. Animals in shelters that are waiting to be adopted take up room, cost money to feed, and may require medical treatment. Because of this, shelters sometimes have to euthanize pets in their care in order to make room for more. When it's time to decide which animals will be put down, pit bulls are typically chosen due to the shelter's high intake of them. According to SaveAbull.org, the euthanasia rate for pit bulls is 93%, meaning that 1 in 600 will be adopted. There are too many pit bulls and not enough people willing to adopt them. People who live in areas where they are not allowed to have pit bulls due to breed-specific legislation, or they just not trust the breed of the dog around themselves and their loved ones, cause dogs to be stuck in shelters being nothing more than a statistic. In an article by the Washington Post entitled "Being Labeled a Pit Bull Can Doom a Shelter Dog: Chances of Adoption" by Karen Brouillard, it was found that dogs were labeled as being a pit bull spent 3 times longer in shelters than those that were not. This shows that the categorization of being a pit bull itself is more influential than the dog's own personality. The stereotyping of pit bulls is not just keeping them in shelters, but also leads to ineffective enforcement of breed-specific legislation. This enforcement leads to the question, who determines if a dog is considered to be on the breeds that is banned or regulated? In a study found in the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science, shelter workers were asked to identify a dog's breed and see if it was a pit bull. This study concluded that there is a lack of consensus about what is considered as being a pit bull. This shows that classifying an animal as being a pit bull or not uses qualitative measures rather than quantitative ones, thus making it ineffective and biased. An article by Dana Campbell entitled "Pit Bull Bans: The State of Breed-Specific Legislation" states that in North Salt Lake, Utah, the city manager has the sole authority to determine if an animal is one of the regulated breeds in their legislation. This city's manager is most likely not an expert on dog breeds, yet they have the responsibility to correctly identify an animal that may or may not be restricted. It's very common for breed-specific legislation to not require any special training in breed identification, or even to talk to a veterinarian about it first. thus leading to incorrect identification of the dog's breed. The unfair judgment and effectiveness of breed-specific legislation causes it to be supported by many organizations. The community people who dedicate their lives to work with animals is a very dedicated and well-educated group, and their opinions should be very influential. The American Veterinary Medical Association, AVMA, is one of the highly respected groups that oppose breed-specific legislation. According to the AVMA, any dog can bite, regardless of its breed, and then they further explain that it is determined by the dog's individual history, behavior, general size, number of dogs involved, and the vulnerability of the person bitten. They believe the problem with breed-specific legislation is not only that it is difficult to enforce, but it's also discriminatory against responsible owners and their dogs. It does not address the social issue of irresponsible pet ownership, and it's not possible to calculate a bite rate for a breed or to compare rates between breeds because data reported is often unreliable. The ASPCA, American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, is another organization that does not support breed-specific legislation. They oppose this legislation because it's ineffective, hard to enforce, and because there are more factors to take in when considering if a dog is dangerous. However, the ASPCA believes that the most harmful consequence of breed-specific legislation is a tendency to compromise rather than to enhance public safety. For example, as breeds become regulated, people who exploit aggressive dogs, like dog fighters, they'll choose a different unregulated breed, like German Shepherds. Now that you know why breed-specific legislation is a problem, you should know what you can do to show that you oppose it. Opposing breed-specific legislation is one thing, but it's important to do something about it if you want to see a change. Write to the lawmakers that in your area to showcase your opinion. Their job is to represent their constituents. So by expressing your beliefs, you with them, they will have a better idea on how to represent you. And your vote matters. Choose elected officials that best represent your beliefs and opinions. Breed-specific legislation is a problem because it unfairly stereotypes dogs based on their breed. It affects the overpopulation of pit bulls in animal shelters, is difficult to enforce, and respected organizations in the animal community strongly oppose it. By opposing same breed legislation, you can make a difference in the lives of millions of pit bulls and other dogs typically referred to as being aggressive or dangerous.